You're the reliable one, and that's exactly why you're stuck. If you're the person everyone on your team goes to because they know you'll say yes, I need you to sit with an uncomfortable idea for a second. That reputation is not building your career. It's capping it. You think being available for everything reads as ambition, as someone hungry to prove themselves. It doesn't. To the people who decide who gets promoted, it reads as something much less flattering, safe to load more onto. You have made yourself the person who absorbs whatever nobody else wants to do, and in exchange, you have quietly taken yourself out of the running for the work that actually moves a career forward. Here's what we're building today. Not a pep talk about self-worth, not a lecture on setting boundaries in the abstract. A working system. 4 connected parts. First, you'll see exactly how the yes habit forms and what it's actually costing you. Then you'll get an operating framework, 3 concrete steps, for telling the difference between a request worth taking and one worth declining, and for saying no in a way that protects your reputation instead of torching it. Last, you'll learn how to hold that line when people push back, because they will. By the end, you won't just understand the problem. You'll have a system you can start running on Monday morning. Let's start with why this trap catches smart, competent people specifically. It's not the lazy or the checked out who fall into it. It's the capable ones. The person who says yes gets a reputation fast, dependable, a team player, someone you can count on. That feels good. It feels like proof you're doing well. But watch what happens over 6 months. The requests don't stop coming. They multiply, because word gets around that you're the one who'll actually do it. Meanwhile, the colleague who says yes more selectively, who protects 2 or 3 hours a week for one visible project, starts showing up in conversations about the next promotion cycle. You show up in conversations about who can cover for someone on vacation. Same effort, wildly different trajectory. That gap is the entire subject of this video, and it starts with understanding the trap itself, the yes trap. Here's how it works, and it's worth being precise about the mechanics, because the trap is disguised as a virtue. Saying yes in the moment feels like the responsible choice. It avoids an awkward conversation. It makes you look helpful, cooperative, easy to work with. None of that is false. The problem isn't any single yes. The problem is what 100 small yeses compound into over a year. An undifferentiated task list with no shape, no theme, and no story you could tell in a performance review. Picture the version of you that says yes to everything that lands in your inbox. You cover a teammate's report because they're swamped. You join a working group because someone asked nicely. You take the ad hoc data pull because you're the fastest with the spreadsheet. Every one of those, on its own, is reasonable. But a year in, you have a long list of things you helped with and nothing you led. You've earned the label, gets it done. That label is genuinely valuable right up until promotion season, when the label that actually gets someone moved up is drives the big thing. Those are different reputations, built by different kinds of yeses, and most people never notice they've been building the wrong one until they're passed over for someone who said no to more and finished less, but finished the right things. This is the part that stings. The busy work and the career-defining work often arrive wearing the same disguise. Both show up as someone asking for your help. Both feel, in the moment, like an opportunity. Telling them apart is a skill, not an instinct, which is exactly why we're going to build a framework for it, instead of hoping you'll just know. But before the framework, we need to understand why smart people keep falling for the disguise in the first place. Because if you don't fix the underlying fear, no script or system will hold for long. Why you actually say yes so often. Ask most chronic yes-sayers why they take on everything, and they'll tell you it's generosity. They like helping. They're a team player. Sometimes that's true, but underneath it, for most people, is fear, not generosity. Fear of being seen as difficult. Fear of looking replaceable if you're not constantly proving your usefulness. Fear that turning down a request means turning down a career opportunity, even when the request is, honestly, just busy work wearing an opportunity costume. There's real research behind this, not just intuition. The organizational psychologist Adam Grant, in his book Give and Take, studied how people fall into different reciprocity styles at work: givers, takers, and matchers. His finding that matters most here is that the givers who succeed long-term are not the ones who say yes to everyone without limits. Unstructured, boundary-less giving is actually the fastest route to burnout, and it makes you an easy target for the people in any organization who will take as much as you let them. The givers who do best professionally, Grant found, are disciplined about where they give. They still help. They just don't help everyone equally, and they don't help at the expense of their own priorities. That's a completely different posture than the reflexive yes most of us default to, and it's the posture we're going to build toward. Notice what this means practically. You don't have to become colder or less helpful to fix this. You have to become more deliberate about who and what gets your help. That's a strategy shift, not a personality transplant, and it's a lot easier to execute than just stop being afraid of conflict, which is the advice most people give and almost nobody can actually follow. Fear doesn't go away because you're told to ignore it. It goes away when you have a system that makes the decision for you before the fear gets a vote. That's what we're building starting next chapter. But first, let's put a real number on what this fear is actually costing you. Because it's bad for your career is vague, and vague doesn't change behavior. The hidden cost of spreading yourself thin: every hour you spend on a low-leverage task is an hour you cannot spend on the handful of things that actually define how your career moves. That's not a metaphor. It's arithmetic. You have a fixed number of hours in a week. Every yes is a withdrawal from that account, and once it's spent, it's spent. There's no overtime bank you can raid later to suddenly produce the one big project that gets you noticed. Here's the comparison that makes this concrete. Take two people with equal talent, equal starting position, same manager, same team. One of them takes on every ad hoc request that comes their way: the extra report, the last-minute deck, the meeting nobody else wants to attend, 12 small asks a week, easy. The other protects a real block of time, several hours a week, guarded almost stubbornly, for one visible, high-effort project, something with a name and an outcome attached to it. A year later, look at what each of them has to show. The first person has a long trail of things they helped complete: useful, appreciated, forgettable. The second person has one thing they can point to and say, "I built that, I own that, here's what changed because I did it." When performance review season comes, or when a leadership role opens up, guess which story gets remembered? This is what diluted bandwidth actually means in practice. It's not that busy people are lazy or unfocused. It's the opposite. Busy people are often working harder than anyone and getting less career credit for it, because the work is spread so thin across so many small things that none of it accumulates into a story. Bandwidth isn't just time. It's attention, energy, and the mental space to actually do great work instead of adequate work. Spread across 12 things, you do 12 adequate things. Concentrated on 2 or 3, you might do 1 or 2 genuinely great things, and great is what gets remembered. Which raises the obvious next question. How do you actually tell, in the moment, which requests deserve that concentrated attention, and which ones are just noise dressed up as opportunity? That's next. Not every yes is worth the same. Here's a distinction almost nobody makes explicitly, and making it explicit is most of the battle. Requests generally fall into 2 rough buckets. Bucket 1 is high leverage. Work that's visible to the people who make decisions about your career. Work that builds a skill you don't yet have, or work that deepens a relationship with someone who matters to your trajectory. Bucket 2 is low leverage. Urgent feeling, forgettable maintenance work. It needs to get done. Somebody has to do it, but doing it doesn't change your story. The trap is that both buckets feel identical in the moment they land on you. Somebody asks for help, and the ask feels like helping either way. Fixing a typo in a shared document and volunteering to lead a cross-team initiative both start with someone saying, "Hey, can you?" Both feel, socially, like the same kind of yes. But one of them is a 5-minute favor that nobody remembers by Friday. And the other is the kind of project people bring up when your name comes up in a room you're not in. Confusing the two is not a moral failing. It's a categorization failure, and categorization failures get fixed with a system, not with willpower. So here's the honest test to run on any request before you answer, and it only takes 3 questions. Does this build a skill I need for where I want to go? Does this put me in front of someone who influences my career? Not just my day-to-day manager, but someone 1 or 2 levels up who might advocate for me later. And third, will this still matter in 6 months, or is it solving today's fire and nothing else? If a request clears at least one of those, it's probably worth serious consideration. If it clears none of them, it's maintenance work, and maintenance work needs a home that isn't automatically you. That test is simple enough to run in your head in 10 seconds, but running it requires actually pausing before you answer, which most people never do, because saying yes fast feels like the polite move. That pause, small as it sounds, is where the entire framework begins. Step 1, audit before you answer. The first working part of this system is an audit, and it's deliberately unglamorous. For 1 week, before this becomes second nature, write down every single request that lands on you. Every ask in Slack, every "Hey, got a minute?" in a hallway or on a call, every reply all that quietly assigns you a task. Next to each one, tag it high leverage or low leverage using the 3 questions from a moment ago. That's it. You're not changing your behavior yet. You're just building visibility into a pattern you've probably never actually looked at directly. What this audit does, almost every time, is shocking to the person who runs it. Most chronic yes-sayers discover that 70 or 80% of their week is low leverage, and they had no idea, because in the moment each request felt urgent and reasonable on its own. You never see the pattern from inside a single Tuesday. You only see it when you line up 5 days in a row and look at the shape of the whole thing. This is the same instinct behind Greg McKeown's idea in his book Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less but better. McKeown's argument is that most of us are terrible at distinguishing the vital few from the trivial many, not because we lack judgment, but because we never stop to actually sort them. We just react to whatever's loudest. The audit is how you stop reacting and start sorting. One important note. The goal here isn't to turn into a robot who refuses anything that doesn't pass a test. The goal is awareness first. Once you can see clearly which of your yeses are building your career and which are just keeping the lights on for someone else, the decision about what to say no to becomes almost obvious. The hard part was never knowing what to do. It was not being able to see the pattern in the first place. Once you can see it, the next problem is purely tactical. How do you actually say no without sounding like you've suddenly stopped being a team player? That's the part most people get wrong, and it's exactly what we're covering next. Step 2. Scripts for saying no without burning trust. This is where most advice about boundaries falls apart, because just say no is technically true and practically useless. Nobody wants to be the person who flatly refuses things, and honestly, you shouldn't be. The skill isn't refusal, it's renegotiation. You're not closing a door, you're offering a different one, and that reframe changes everything about how the conversation lands. Here are 3 ways to say no that protect your reputation instead of damaging it. First, the trade-off. Instead of a flat no, You say something like, I can take this on if we move the deck for Thursday back to next week. Which one's the priority? This isn't a refusal, it's a negotiation, and it puts the decision about what matters more back on the person asking, which is honestly where it belongs, because they usually have more context on true urgency than you do. Second, naming your capacity honestly. Something like, I want to do this well, and with what's already on my plate this week, I can't give it the attention it deserves. Can we look at next week instead? This works because it frames the no as protecting the quality of your work, not protecting your comfort. And almost nobody can argue with wanting to do good work. Third, proposing an alternative owner or timeline. Something like, I'm not the right person to unblock this fastest, but Priya finished something similar last month. Would it help if I looped her in? You're still being useful. You're just not being the bottleneck. Notice what all three of these have in common. None of them are cold. None of them are confrontational. They're all versions of yes, but not like that, or yes, but not now, which is a completely different message than a flat no, and it lands completely differently too. You could use any of these three, almost word for word, in a Slack message or a meeting tomorrow. That's the point. A framework you can't use immediately isn't a framework, it's a nice idea. But even with perfect scripts, sometimes you'll realize the mistake already happened. You already said yes to something you shouldn't have. That's not a dead end. There's a way to fix it. And it's the next piece of the system. Step 3. Taking back a yes you already gave. Sometimes the audit and the scripts come too late for a specific commitment because you already said yes last week, before any of this, and now you're stuck with it. Here's the good news. An already given yes is not permanent. It can be renegotiated, and doing it well is actually a sign of professionalism, not flakiness if you frame it correctly. The move is to go back to whoever you committed to and reset either the scope or the deadline. And the framing matters enormously here. You are not saying, I've changed my mind, this isn't important to me anymore. You are saying, I want to make sure this gets the quality it deserves, and I've realized I can't do that on the original timeline given everything else on my plate right now. Here's what I can commit to instead. That's a completely different message. One sounds like you're backing out. The other sounds like you actually care about the outcome enough to be honest about what's realistic, which, when you think about it, is exactly the trait you want to be known for. Bring a concrete alternative when you have this conversation. Don't just show up with a problem. Maybe that's a later deadline. Maybe that's a narrower scope, doing the core of what was asked well, instead of the full version poorly. Maybe it's bringing in someone else to help split the load. Managers and colleagues respond far better to here's the adjustment I need and here's why than to a vague apology with no plan attached. Nobody remembers the person who renegotiated a deadline once with a good reason and a clear alternative. Everyone remembers the person who overpromised, delivered something rushed and mediocre, and never said a word about it until it was too late. Renegotiating early is a strength. Silently struggling is the actual risk to your reputation, and it's the one people wrongly believe is the safer choice. Of course, even when you handle a renegotiation or a decline perfectly, you can't control how the other person reacts. Some people push back. Let's talk about what that actually looks like and how to hold your ground. When people push back, here's what nobody tells you going in. The first few times you say no or renegotiate a yes, some people will not take it well. There might be a guilt trip. There might be a raised eyebrow, a slightly cooler tone in the next email, a comment about how you used to be so easy to work with. This is normal, and it is not a sign you did something wrong. It's a sign you changed a pattern that was working out very well for the person on the other end of it. Here's the part that matters most. The first no from someone who's historically said yes to everything is always the hardest for both sides. It feels like a bigger deal than it is. Because it's unfamiliar. But hold the line calmly, without over-explaining or over-apologizing. And something predictable happens. By the second or third time, the same people largely stop bringing you the low-value stuff in the first place, because they've recalibrated what you're actually available for. You haven't become harder to work with. You've become someone whose yes means something, which, counterintuitively, makes people trust your judgment more, not less. A yes from someone who says yes to everything is worth very little, because it's not really a decision, it's a reflex. A yes from someone known for being selective is worth a lot, because everyone knows you actually thought about it. The mistake most people make here is treating the first pushback as proof that the whole approach was wrong and folding immediately back into the old pattern. Don't. Expect friction the first couple of times, plan for it, and hold steady through it calmly rather than defensively. You're not being difficult. You're recalibrating a relationship that had drifted into taking your time for granted. And recalibration is always a little uncomfortable before it settles into the new normal. Stick with it past that discomfort, and what you're left with, over months rather than days, is the actual payoff of everything we've covered today. Reliability beats availability. Let's bring this all the way back together, because the through line here is a distinction most people never make explicitly. Always available and genuinely reliable are not the same thing, and confusing them is what keeps smart people stuck. Always available means you say yes to anything anytime, and your worth is measured by how much you can be interrupted. Reliable means something much narrower and much more valuable. You deliver fully, on time, at a high standard, on the things you've actually agreed to do, because you didn't agree to 15 other things at the same time. Here's the full system again, quickly, because you should leave with the whole shape of it in your head. You start by recognizing the yes trap, the fact that constant availability reads as safe to load up, not as ambition. Underneath of that trap is fear, not generosity, and Adam Grant's research on givers, who set limits, shows that disciplined giving beats boundaryless giving every time, for the giver and for the people they help. That fear costs you real bandwidth, the hours and attention that could otherwise build the one project that actually gets you noticed. Once you can see that not every yes is equal, high leverage against low leverage, you run the audit, tracking a week of requests the way McKeown would tell you to, sorting the vital few from the trivial many instead of reacting to whatever's loudest. Then you use the scripts. The trade-off, the honest capacity statement, the alternative owner, to say no in a way that reads as thoughtful rather than difficult. When you've already said yes to something you shouldn't have, you renegotiate it early and honestly instead of quietly struggling. And when people push back, which they will, you hold the line calmly, because the third no is never as hard as the first. Do this for a few months and the shift is real. You'll do less, visibly. You'll be remembered for more. Not because you worked harder, but because you finally stopped treating your time like it belonged to whoever asked for it first. If this gave you something to actually use this week, stick around. This channel is about exactly this, the practical, unglamorous mechanics of building a career and a life that hold up, one honest decision at a time.